The voicemail had been sitting in his phone for 9 months before he listened to it. Not unheard, he had seen the notification, had known it was there, had pressed the small red circle with his thumb 3 separate times, and each time put the phone face down on whatever surface was nearest, and walked to another room. Some messages arrive with a weight you can feel through the screen before you've heard a word. He knew whose voice it would be. He knew roughly what the voice would say. He had been telling himself, for 9 months, that he would listen when he was ready. He listened on a Tuesday evening in February, sitting in the kitchen of a house that used to have more people in it, eating reheated food alone when he was not ready at all. The voicemail was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. He listened to it once. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time afterward. Then, he picked up the phone and called his mother. The call went like this, he said, "Mama, I think I got it wrong." She said, "Tell me." He told her. She listened without interrupting, which is what she always does when the thing being said is the kind of thing that requires the whole container. When he was done, she said, in the voice that never breaks, "You already know what you have to do." He said, "I know." She said, "Philip always said." He said, "I know, Mama." She said, "Okay then." He sat in the kitchen a while longer after the call. The reheated food had gone cold outside. It was the kind of February night that makes Los Angeles feel like a city pretending not to have weather. He was 47 years old, 4 championships, $400 million. One of the most recognized human beings on the planet, sitting alone at a kitchen table, figuring out how he had missed the thing that was right in front of him for 6 years. But before you understand what was in that voicemail, you need to notice 3 things that were already true the morning before he listened to it. 3 things in 3 different places. 1 in his house, 1 in a neighborhood in Houston, 1 in a school gymnasium in Newark, New Jersey. All of them pointing at the same answer he had been walking away from for 9 months. The first was a coffee mug, still in the cabinet above the second shelf from the left, behind the mugs he used every day, because he had not moved it, and had not been able to explain to himself why he had not moved it. It was white with a small chip on the handle from a morning 2 years before the end, when it had slipped and he had caught it before it hit the floor, and she had laughed at the catch. The specific involuntary laugh that arrives before you decide to laugh, and set it back on the counter without comment. It was a Tuesday morning. He had been in a hurry. He did not know, standing in that kitchen 2 years later, that laugh had been a moment he should have stayed inside longer. He had moved on to the next thing. He always moved on to the next thing. That was the first problem. He didn't know it was a problem yet. The second was a notebook. Black cover, college ruled, sitting on the kitchen counter of a house in the 3rd Ward neighborhood of Houston, belonging to a woman named Dr. Renata Price, 41. A family therapist with a private practice and a particular specialty in what she called, in her clinical notes, not to her clients directly, the cost of competence. The notebook had a page with a name on it. The page was not a client file. It was a note she had written to herself 9 months ago, after a phone call she had not expected, from a woman she had met 7 years prior at a conference in Atlanta, whose situation had stayed with her in the specific way certain situations stay with therapists after hours. The name on the page was not Shaq's. It was his wife's. Former wife. Imani, the third, was a photograph, framed on the wall of a school gymnasium in Newark, New Jersey, of a youth basketball team from 2019. 7 kids, 9 years old, in yellow jerseys. Second from the left in the back row was a boy named Marcus, who had nothing to do with Shaq except one thing: His mother had driven him to that gym every Saturday morning for 2 years, through 2 bus transfers, working around a schedule that had no business allowing for Saturday mornings, because the coach had told her once that Marcus had something, and she had decided that something mattered more than convenient. The coach had noticed. The coach had made a call. That call was about to collide with a voicemail, a coffee mug, and a notebook in ways that nobody standing in that gymnasium in February could have mapped. None of these 3 things were in the voicemail. But the voicemail was the center of everything that happened next. And you are going to need to stay with this whole story, because the real reason Imani walked away is not the reason anyone assumed. Not the tabloids, not the people who had opinions, not Shaq himself, for 9 months. Now here is what you need to know about Shaquille O'Neal before you can feel the weight of that kitchen table. He grew up in Newark, in a house run by 2 people who had between them a comprehensive theory of how to become someone. Philip Harrison's theory was structural, discipline, follow through, show up before you're asked. His one rule, do not be a reaction. Be a response was on the inside of every front door, in marker on masking tape, not because he needed reminding, but because the people around him might. Lucille's theory was relational. Know the people you love by their specific details. The laugh that arrives before they decide to laugh. The way they hold a coffee mug on difficult mornings. The word they use when they're trying not to ask for something. She had learned this from a grandmother who had learned it from necessity. In an era when the language of need was too dangerous to speak plainly, and the people who loved you had to learn to read the other language, or miss the thing entirely. Shaq inherited both theories. He was disciplined and present and reliable, and he loved the people around him with the specific, demonstrable, logistical love of someone who shows up and takes care of things. He provided. He protected. He remembered birthdays. He was, by every external measure, a man doing the thing correctly. He missed the other language. Philip Harrison died in 2013. The masking tape strip is framed now. It hangs in every property. He reads it every time he enters. He has been reading it for 52 years, and he thought he understood it. He was beginning to understand, sitting in that kitchen in February, that understanding a rule and understanding what produced it are 2 different things. That Philip had posted the rule on the door not because he was certain about it, but because he had learned it the hard way, in a marriage. And he wanted his stepson to learn it from a strip of tape instead. Philip never said that part. He should have. Now here is what you need to know about Imani. Imani grew up in Cincinnati, the oldest of 3 daughters of a woman who had raised them largely alone after a departure that was not explained to the children until they were old enough to not be broken by the explanation. She was, by the time she was 11, the kind of oldest child who has learned to read a room from the necessity of managing it, who can tell from the set of someone's shoulders whether the evening is going to require management or simply witness. She became a physician not because medicine was a childhood dream, but because the logic of it matched the logic she had already been applying to the people around her. Look for what's wrong before it announces itself. Catch it early. Don't wait for the crisis. She met Shaq at 31. She was already a person who knew herself, who spoke plainly, who did not frame requests as suggestions or name things with the softening language that hopes the other person will understand without being told directly. She would say, "I need you here for this." She would say, "When I do this, I need you to notice." She said these things clearly and specifically because she had learned. In the long training of an oldest child, that unclear communication costs more than the temporary discomfort of saying the direct thing. He heard her. He answered. He showed up. But showing up for the specific request is not the same as hearing the thing beneath it. And the thing beneath it, the thing she was actually saying, in the language she had learned from necessity and that he had not learned to read, was, "I need you to see me before I have to ask you to look." She had said this once, directly, plainly, in the kitchen of their house in Los Angeles, on a Thursday evening 3 years before the end. She had used those exact words. He had listened carefully. He had said, "I see you." He meant it. He thought he was answering. He was answering the sentence. He was not hearing the 20 years of architecture beneath the sentence. She did not say it again. People who have said the direct thing and felt it land without taking root do not usually say it again. They begin, quietly and without announcement, to stop expecting. This is not the part anyone talks about when a marriage ends. Nobody talks about the slow education of the wrong kind of absence, not the physical absence, the logistical absence, but the particular absence of someone who is there and present and looking directly at you and seeing only what you explicitly told him was there. Nobody talks about what it costs a person to stop expecting. Nobody talks about how long it takes, or how quiet it is, or how by the time the other person notices, the only honest thing left to say is that there is not enough left to rebuild from. She did not leave in anger. There was no dramatic moment, no explosion, no version of the story that involves raised voices and a slammed door. She left the way competent, self-sufficient people leave when they have finally exhausted the hope that the thing will change on its own, quietly, with sadness, but without cruelty, carrying her own boxes. He thought he understood why. He told himself a version of the story that made it about scheduling, about the particular demands of 2 careers with too many time zones between them, about the reasonable incompatibility of 2 lives running too fast in different directions. He told himself this version for 9 months. It was a comfortable version. It did not require him to change anything about himself that felt structural. It let him keep the theory of who he was intact. The voicemail changed the version. She had called on a Sunday in May. He had been in Orlando. He had seen the notification and put the phone face down and walked to another room. For 9 months he had let the notification sit. He does not know, fully, why he listened in February instead of some other month. He thinks it was the coffee mug, that he had opened the cabinet for something and seen it behind the everyday mugs and stood in front of the open cabinet for longer than made sense. And something in that standing had been a preparation, though he could not have named it as one. The voicemail was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. She did not call to repair anything. She was not leaving a door open. She was leaving a record, for herself as much as for him, of the true accounting, stated plainly, in the direct language she had always used, because that was who she was, and she was not going to stop being who she was to protect him from information he needed. She said she was not angry. She said she wanted to be clear about the reason because she thought he deserved a clear reason, and because she did not want him to spend years working on the wrong thing. She said, "You were always there. I know that. I know how much that cost. What I needed, the thing I kept trying to tell you I needed, was for you to be there before I told you where there was. I needed you to read the room before I described the room. I needed you to catch the thing before I named it. And I know that sounds like I'm asking for something impossible. But it's not impossible. You catch everything else before it falls. You caught my coffee mug on a Tuesday morning without even thinking. I needed you to catch me like that. And by the end I was done asking." He listened to the whole 4 minutes and 12 seconds without moving. The reheated food was on the table. The kitchen was the same kitchen. The coffee mug was in the cabinet. He called his mother. She told him he already knew what to do. He did. The first thing he did was call Dr. Renata Price. He found her name through a colleague who had worked with her professionally. He called her office. She did not know him in any context except one. 7 years ago, she had met Imani at a conference in Atlanta, and they had talked for 40 minutes over terrible conference coffee. And something in that conversation had stayed with her. She had written Imani's name on a page in a black notebook 9 months ago, after a call that she would not and could not discuss, and had stared at the name and thought, he is going to have to figure this out on his own. She had hoped he would. She agreed to see him. He did not go to see Dr. Renata Price to save his marriage. That is not what the calls were about, and that is not what he said when he arrived. He went because the voicemail had done the thing good, honest language always does when it finally gets inside. It had dismantled the comfortable version and replaced it with the true one. And the true one required him to understand something about himself that he could not understand alone. He went every 2 weeks for 11 months. He learned things, not comfortable things. The kind of learning that requires you to sit with the discomfort of seeing your own pattern from outside your own pattern. Seeing how a man who loves the people around him can be simultaneously completely reliable and comprehensively unavailable in the specific way that costs the most. He learned the difference between answering a request and hearing what produced it. He learned that the skill of reading the other language, the one Lucille had carried from her grandmother, the one Imani had been speaking in the kitchen for 6 years, was not a natural talent. It was a practice. It could be learned. He was learning it. He is still learning it. He did not call Imani. That was not the point. She had said what she needed to say. He had heard it. The work was his to do, not to report back to her. What he did do, in the 11th month, was go back to Newark. He went to the gymnasium at the school, where a photograph from 2019 hung on the wall. 7 kids in yellow jerseys, Marcus second from the left in the back row. He had been referred there through a chain that had started with a coach and ended with a program for kids whose particular something was in danger of going undeveloped, for reasons that had nothing to do with the something and everything to do with the Saturday morning bus transfer. He had funded programs before. This was different. He sat in on a practice. He watched the kids run drills. He watched the coach, a woman named Sandra, 28, who had been coaching this program for 3 years on a salary that required her to also work Friday evenings elsewhere, tell a 9-year-old named Darius to stop reacting to where the ball had been and start reading where it was going. He sat with that for a long time. Stop reacting to where the ball has been. Start reading where it's going. Philip Harrison had said this in a different language for his entire adult life. Imani had said it in the kitchen on a Thursday evening with exact words. Dr. Renata Price had said it in a clinical frame across 11 months of sessions. And Sandra, 28, had just said it to a 9-year-old in yellow sneakers who immediately understood, who immediately shifted his feet, who was reading the room before the room told him where it was going. He funded the program. He funded Sandra's full salary so the Friday evening job could stop. He set up a scholarship fund in the name of Philip Harrison for kids in the program who needed the bus fare and the gear and the particular resource of being told by someone who shows up every Saturday that their something matters. He did these things without announcement. He left before the practice was over. In the entrance of his house in Los Angeles, on the wall where the masking tape strip has always hung, there is now a second thing beside it. It is not a photograph. It is a sentence he wrote on an index card in his own handwriting and taped beside Philip's rule. The sentence is from the voicemail. He has not told anyone what it says. But he reads it every morning before he leaves, the same way he reads Philip's Rule, the same way Lucille's grandmother once read the room in a language that couldn't be spoken, the same way Imani set a chipped coffee mug back on the counter without comment on a Tuesday morning 2 years before the end. Some things you learn from being told. Some things you learn from the evidence of what you missed. The difference between those two kinds of learning is everything. The difference is what changes. He is changed. Drop a comment and tell us, where are you watching from? And has someone in your life ever told you something important in a language you weren't ready to hear yet? We read every one. If this reached something in you, hit the like button. Not because of what it does for the algorithm, but because somewhere there's a Sandra coaching kids on a Saturday morning on a salary that shouldn't require a second job, and she deserves to know that her story traveled. Subscribe to this community if you haven't yet. Every person who joins makes the next story possible. The next one is already waiting. We will see you there.